Warning: prepare yourself for a deep dive into one of the most macabre and disturbing cases in Detroit's history. Before we begin, I ask that you write in the comments below where you are listening from and what time it is right now. We also ask that you subscribe by clicking subscribe to help us produce more documented accounts like this one every day. The box arrived at the University of Michigan's Department of Parapsychology in the winter of 1968, nearly forgotten for 2 decades, in the basement storage of Detroit General Hospital. Inside were 57 reel-to-reel tapes, 16 notebooks filled with cramped handwriting, and a collection of electronic components that no one initially recognized. The label, yellowed with age, read simply, "Whisper Project, 1947-48, Caution, Contaminated Materials." What began as an obscure donation to the university archives would soon reveal one of the most disturbing chapters in the city's scientific history, one deliberately buried beneath bureaucracy and silence. According to the few surviving records, Dr. Walter Harmon established the Detroit Sound Phenomena Laboratory in 1946, shortly after returning from his military service. The building, a converted textile factory on the outskirts of Detroit's industrial district, was purchased with a combination of his family inheritance and what he claimed was private research funding. But what exactly was he researching? That question would haunt everyone who later encountered his work. The laboratory operated for exactly 17 months before being permanently shut down, following what official records only describe as an incident resulting in multiple casualties and equipment contamination. The initial investigation focused on potential chemical exposure or radiation, but no conclusive evidence was ever found. What happened inside those walls? And why did 3 separate government agencies classify all findings until 1959? The answers, pieced together from fractured records, survivor testimonies, and those haunting tapes, suggest something far worse than a mere industrial accident. Something that began with the simple question, could technology capture the voices of the dead? In the post-war economic boom of 1947, Detroit was a city transformed. The automobile factories that had spent years producing tanks and aircraft for the war effort had returned to civilian production, and the streets hummed with a sense of renewed purpose. Neighborhoods expanded outward from the city center as returning veterans sought new homes for growing families. The brick building at 837 Verner Avenue stood 3 stories tall, its windows facing eastward toward the river. From the outside, it appeared unremarkable among the many industrial structures dotting this section of the city. The sign above the door simply read, "Detroit Sound Phenomena Laboratory," with no further explanation of its purpose. According to city records, Dr. Harmon obtained all proper permits for electronic research and sound engineering development, nothing that would raise questions from authorities. The staff consisted of just 7 individuals: Dr. Walter Harmon, Dr. Eleanor Weiss, 3 research assistants, 1 electronics engineer, and a secretary who managed the daily operations. They kept to themselves, rarely interacting with workers from neighboring businesses. They were peculiar folks, recalled Samuel Thornton, who operated a machine shop across the street during those years, always coming and going at odd hours. Sometimes you'd hear strange mechanical sounds late into the night, like motors running at changing speeds. We figured they were developing some new recording technology. Everyone was inventing something back then. What neighbors couldn't know was that behind those walls, Dr. Harmon was pursuing a theory he had developed during his military service, that human consciousness created measurable electromagnetic disturbances that persisted after death. More disturbing still, he believed these residual energy signatures could be captured, amplified, and translated back into human speech with the right equipment. Thornton remembered that the laboratory received numerous deliveries, often large crates containing electronic components. There was one delivery that stood out, he noted in a statement given to investigators years later. A truck arrived very late one evening in November of '47. They unloaded several large metal containers, needed 4 men to carry each one. They were extremely careful with them, and Dr. Harmon supervised the entire process himself. After that night, something changed about the place. The windows were blacked out, they installed new locks, and the sounds coming from inside became different. The transformation of Dr. Walter Harmon from respected physician to obsessive researcher began not in Detroit, but in the Pacific Theater during World War II. According to military records, Harmon served as a field surgeon with the United States Army Medical Corps, stationed primarily in the Philippines. His service record was exemplary until an incident in March of 1945. According to the heavily redacted report, Harmon's medical unit was caught in an artillery barrage that killed 17 personnel. Harmon himself was buried in rubble for nearly 36 hours before being rescued. In his personal journal, recovered among the materials in the donation box, he described something that military censors had completely removed from official records. March 23rd. I heard them while trapped beneath the collapsed aid station. Not muffled voices from above, searching for survivors, but clear and distinct conversations from men I knew to be dead. Hawkins arguing about his wife's brother. Mills reciting what sounded like inventory counts. Chen explaining a technical procedure I didn't understand. All 3 had been in the tent section directly hit by the first shell. Their bodies were less than 6 feet from where I lay pinned. The voices continued for hours, sometimes overlapping, sometimes responding to my questions. When I mentioned this after rescue, the attending physician diagnosed me with traumatic confusion and oxygen deprivation. But I know what I heard. The experience repeated during my recovery in Manila. The voices came through the electric fan in my hospital room, through the radios, through anything capable of producing sound. Something about the electromagnetic fields. Something about the transition between states. I have the beginning of a theory. This journal entry marks the genesis of the Whisper Project. Upon his honorable discharge and return to civilian life, Harmon immediately began seeking ways to test his theory. He reconnected with Dr. Eleanor Weiss, a former colleague from Johns Hopkins with expertise in emerging electronic technologies. In the margins of his research notes, Weiss added her own observations. Walter's theories about residual electromagnetic signatures are unconventional, but not entirely without scientific basis. The human brain produces measurable electrical activity. What happens to this energy after death remains an open question. His experiences in the Philippines clearly traumatized him, but trauma doesn't automatically invalidate perception. I've agreed to assist primarily to ensure his research follows proper scientific methodology. If nothing else, we may develop new recording technologies with practical applications. This professional justification would soon give way to something darker as their experiments progressed. The official explanation given to the few who inquired about the laboratory's purpose was that Harmon and his team were developing advanced recording equipment for medical applications, specifically to capture and analyze heart and lung sounds with greater precision than existing technology allowed. This explanation satisfied most casual inquiries and provided cover for the equipment they needed to acquire. Behind closed doors, however, the true nature of their work took shape through 3 distinct research phases documented in Harmon's meticulous notes. Phase 1, which lasted from October 46 through February 47, focused on developing what Harmon called heightened sensitivity recording apparatus, essentially microphones and amplifiers modified to capture sounds below the normal threshold of human hearing. The team conducted hundreds of baseline recordings in locations ranging from empty rooms to graveyards, searching for anomalies they could study further. Most sessions yielded nothing beyond ambient noise, but on February 12th, during a recording session in the basement of Detroit Receiving Hospital's morgue, they captured something that changed the direction of their research. The original tape, labeled simply DRH-0212, contains 43 minutes of near silence before a distinct vocal pattern emerges from the background static. The voice, faint but unmistakable, appears to say, "Cold table, why cold?" repeated 3 times before fading back into static. 3 separate audio analysts, who later examined the recording, confirmed these words were present in the audio and did not result from equipment malfunction. None could explain their source, as the recording logs confirmed no one was speaking during that segment, and the morgue was empty of living personnel at that time. This recording became what Harmon referred to as their proof of concept, and propelled them into Phase 2, the development of what he called the electromagnetic voice inducer. According to engineering schematics found among the recovered materials, this device combined elements of radio receivers, oscilloscopes, and custom-built amplifiers arranged in a configuration unlike anything used in standard recording technology of that era. "The conventional approach is fundamentally flawed," Harmon wrote. "We aren't trying to capture sound waves traveling through air, but rather electromagnetic patterns that require translation into audible form. The EVI doesn't record, it receives and interprets." By June of '47, the team had constructed a prototype and begun regular testing sessions. The results were inconsistent, but increasingly concerning to at least one team member. Research assistant Thomas Garrett tendered his resignation on July 7th, stating in his letter, "I cannot continue to participate in what I believe has become an unethical pursuit. The sounds we are recording cannot be verified as originating from deceased individuals, yet Dr. Harmon increasingly interprets them as such, without applying proper scientific skepticism." More troubling, some recent sessions have produced what appear to be expressions of distress. "If against all scientific probability these are genuine communications from the deceased, we may be causing harm in a domain we don't understand. I will not be party to this." Garrett's resignation was accepted without comment, and his position was never filled. The remaining team proceeded to Phase 3, which would prove catastrophic. In the years that followed, neighbors recalled the gradual transformation of the laboratory and its occupants. The delivery of heavy electrical equipment continued throughout the summer of '47, often accompanied by large quantities of ice, which seemed strange given the building had modern refrigeration. Workers from the laboratory spoke less and less with outsiders, and those who did exhibited noticeable changes in behavior. "Miss Pendleton, their secretary, used to stop by our diner every morning for coffee," said Gladys Miller, who worked at the corner establishment 2 blocks from the laboratory. "Real friendly lady, always chatting about films or asking about my kids. By late summer she'd changed, dark circles under her eyes, jumped at sudden noises, once knocked over her entire cup when the cook dropped a pan in the back. I asked if she was sleeping okay, and she just stared at me before saying, 'They never stop talking now. We can't turn it off.' Never explained what she meant by that." Dr. Weiss similarly withdrew from her previous academic contacts. Records from the University of Michigan show she cancelled 3 scheduled lectures in September without explanation. Her last public appearance was at a small electrical engineering conference in Chicago, where colleagues described her as unnaturally thin and distracted to the point of appearing disoriented. During her presentation on advancements in audio filtering technology, she reportedly went off script and asked the audience, "How do we know when we're speaking to something that only resembles a human consciousness? What are the ethical boundaries when that resemblance becomes convincing?" She left immediately after her talk, taking no questions. The building itself began to change as well. Additional electrical lines were installed in August, significantly increasing the power supply. The windows, previously only covered at night, were permanently blacked out. Most notably, according to city inspection records, the team installed a sophisticated lock system that required both key cards and numerical codes to access the main laboratory. Unusual security measures for that era, particularly for what was ostensibly just a sound engineering facility. Perhaps most telling was the installation of a complete isolation chamber in the building's basement level in late September. According to the contractor who installed the specialized soundproofing materials, Harmon specified that the room needed to block all external electromagnetic signals as well as sound, essentially creating what would now be called a Faraday cage. He was insistent that not even radio waves could penetrate the space, the contractor noted in an interview conducted in 1953. When I asked why, he said it was the only way to ensure they were hearing only what they were supposed to hear. Something about his intensity when he said it made my skin crawl. What exactly they hoped to hear, or perhaps feared hearing, in that isolated space remains central to understanding what eventually occurred. On the morning of October 3rd, 1947, Dr. Harmon gathered his remaining team for what his notes described as the culmination of our efforts. The night before, he had made a final modification to the electromagnetic voice inducer, incorporating components he had specially ordered from a military surplus supplier. These components, according to the one surviving invoice, had originally been developed for long-range communication systems used in remote military outposts. The fundamental breakthrough, he wrote in his final journal entry, is not in capturing passive residual energies, but in creating an active system capable of establishing two-way communication. The EVI Mark II doesn't merely receive, it calls out and creates a channel. Today, we remove the last barriers between perceived realities. The session began at precisely 9:15 in the morning. Present were Doctors Harmon and Weiss, research assistants Claire Donovan and Michael Lewis, and electronics engineer Robert Shepard. Secretary Judith Pendleton was stationed outside the main laboratory with instructions to prevent any interruptions. According to the laboratory's sign-in log, this was the full complement of remaining staff. The recording from this session, labeled EVI 21003, begins with standard calibration procedures and equipment checks. Harmon can be heard directing each team member to their stations and reviewing the protocol they would follow. At the 14-minute mark, the recording captures the activation of what Harmon calls the amplification sequence. For approximately 20 seconds, there is only the sound of increasing electrical hum, followed by what audio experts have identified as power fluctuations in the recording equipment itself. Then at 14 minutes and 23 seconds, the first anomaly appears, a series of rhythmic clicking sounds, followed by what sounds like distant voices speaking simultaneously, too overlapped to distinguish individual words. Harmon's voice can be heard. Incredible. It's working exactly as theorized. The barrier is thinning. Eleanor, adjust the frequency modulator to the parameters we established yesterday. Weiss responds, Walter, I'm registering unusual power fluctuations. The system is drawing significantly more electricity than our calculations predicted. Proceed as planned, Harmon insists. We're too close to stop now. At the 17-minute mark, the background voices suddenly become clearer, though still overlapping. Several phrases are distinguishable. Not supposed to be here. Painful light. Who opened the wrong frequency? Harmon's excitement is palpable in the recording. We're establishing connection. This is beyond anything we've achieved before. Robert, increase the receiver sensitivity. Claire, begin the prepared questions. What follows is 53 seconds of Claire Donovan asking predetermined questions with pauses for responses. The questions are scientific and methodical. How many entities are present in this communication? What is your current state of existence? Do you retain memories from your physical life? The responses, however, become increasingly chaotic. Multiple voices speaking simultaneously, some answering the questions, while others appear to be having entirely different conversations. And beneath it all, a growing sound that audio engineers have been unable to identify. something like electrical interference, but with an almost organic quality, as though the static itself were breathing. At 19 minutes and 40 seconds, there is a sudden change in the recording quality. The voices synchronize into what sounds like a single voice, with multiple tonal layers, speaking with perfect clarity. You have created a door without understanding what waits on the other side. We have been attempting to reach this precise frequency for longer than your civilization has existed. Thank you for your service in this matter. We will now come through. What happens next remains the subject of intense speculation. The recording captures shouting from multiple team members, electrical surges, and the sound of glass breaking. Harmon can be heard yelling instructions that are largely unintelligible due to the increasing chaos. At 21 minutes and 17 seconds, all recognizable human voices abruptly cease, replaced by what can only be described as a cacophony of sounds that bear no resemblance to human speech, though they maintain speech-like patterns and cadences. The recording continues for another 7 minutes and 22 seconds before ending with the sound of the tape machine itself powering down. This is the last documented activity from inside the main laboratory. What was discovered when authorities finally entered the Detroit Sound Phenomena Laboratory 3 days later has been largely redacted from official records. The initial response came not from local police, but from a specialized military unit based in Fort Detrick, Maryland, suggesting federal authorities had been monitoring Harmon's work more closely than records indicate. According to the sanitized report filed with the Detroit Police Department, officers were called to the scene on October 6th after Secretary Judith Pendleton, who had been absent due to illness on the day of the incident, arrived at work and found the laboratory doors locked from the inside with no response from the team. The responding officers noted the unusual security measures and the extreme temperature inside the building when they finally gained entry, described as cold enough to see breath despite functioning heating systems. The official report states only that 5 deceased individuals were discovered inside the main laboratory area, cause of death undetermined pending autopsy. However, this explanation conflicts with witness statements from the first responders. Officer Raymond Mercer, who retired from the Detroit Police Department in 1961, provided a sworn affidavit in 1967 describing what he saw. The scene defied explanation by any standard investigative parameters. The 5 victims were found seated at their respective workstations, showing no signs of trauma or struggle. Medical examiner initially suspected gas leak or poisoning, but preliminary tests were negative. The most disturbing aspect was their expressions. All 5 were identical expressions of what I can only describe as profound horror, eyes wide and fixed on the central apparatus. Rigor mortis had set in, but the positioning was unusual. Arms extended toward the device as if simultaneously reaching for controls. The device itself was still operational when we arrived, though no sound was emanating from it. The temperature anomaly was centered around this equipment, with frost formed on metal components despite the room temperature. I have never witnessed anything comparable in 30 years of police work. The autopsies, conducted by military medical personnel rather than the county medical examiner, officially listed the cause of death as cardiac arrest due to extreme stress response of undetermined origin. All 5 deaths were recorded as occurring simultaneously, though the medical report notes the impossibility of establishing this with certainty. More telling was what happened to the laboratory itself. Within 24 hours of the body's removal, the entire building was quarantined by federal authorities. A perimeter was established, and hazardous materials teams spent 7 days removing equipment and documents. On October 17th, despite having been cleared of any biological or chemical contamination, the building was demolished and all materials were transported to an undisclosed facility. The land remained vacant until 1953, when it was paved over to create a parking lot for the expanding automotive plant next door. No plaque or marker indicates what once stood at that location. For nearly a decade following the incident, the events at the Detroit Sound Phenomena Laboratory remained sealed behind government classification. The families of the deceased were given minimal information beyond confirmation of their deaths. Dr. Weiss's sister, Margaret Simmons, fought a lengthy legal battle attempting to gain access to her siblings' research and personal effects. They wouldn't even return her jewelry or personal notebooks, Simmons stated in a 1955 interview with the Detroit Free Press. Everything was classified as potential evidence in an ongoing investigation, though they would never specify what kind of investigation or under whose authority it was being conducted. When I asked directly if it related to national security, the agent simply said, "Your sister's work touched on matters beyond public understanding." That was the closest I ever came to an explanation. The secrecy extended to the academic community as well. Colleagues of both Harmon and Weiss at various universities reported that their previous research papers were removed from department archives. Their academic publications remained available, but specific laboratory notes and experimental data from the years 1945 through 47 were systematically collected by federal agents. This level of information control was particularly unusual given that, by all official accounts, the laboratory had merely been developing improved recording technology. The first cracks in this wall of silence appeared in 1954, when Thomas Garrett, the research assistant who had resigned 3 months before the incident, was interviewed by writer Richard Matheson, who was researching material for a science fiction story. Though Matheson never published the interview directly, elements of it appeared in his subsequent work. According to notes from this conversation, discovered among Matheson's papers after his death, Garrett revealed several disturbing details. The project began changing around April of 47. The recordings contained voices that couldn't be explained by equipment malfunction or environmental factors. At first, they were fragmentary, single words or short phrases emerging from static. Dr. Harmon became obsessed with improving the signal clarity. By June, we were capturing full sentences, often responses to questions posed during recording sessions. That's when I noticed the pattern that ultimately led to my resignation. The voices began using personal details about team members, things they couldn't possibly know. They mentioned childhood memories, private conversations, secret fears. When I pointed this out to Dr. Harmon, suggesting we might be experiencing some form of auditory pareidolia or subconscious projection, he dismissed my concerns entirely. He said, "Of course they know us. They've been watching us all along. That's why they're answering our call." The implication that we were dealing with intelligences that had been observing us rather than random electromagnetic phenomena crossed the line from scientific inquiry into something I couldn't support. The final straw came during a session in early July when one of the voices addressed me directly by my full name, including my middle name, which wasn't used in any laboratory documentation, and said, "We remember you from before you were born, Thomas Allen Garrett, and we will know you after." I submitted my resignation the next day. When Matheson asked if Garrett had shared these concerns with authorities after learning of his colleagues' deaths, Garrett reportedly replied, "I tried. 3 different agencies interviewed me. They recorded everything, took my signed statements, confiscated my personal notes, and then proceeded to act as though none of it had happened. The official who spoke with me last made it very clear that pursuing the matter would have significant negative consequences for my future and my family's well-being. I have a wife and 2 young children. I chose to remain silent." In the summer of 1959, the classification on the laboratory incident was partially lifted, allowing limited information to be released to academic institutions. This coincided with the establishment of the first formal parapsychology department at the University of Virginia, suggesting a possible shift in how such research was being handled by authorities. Dr. Raymond Bennett, who headed the newly formed department, requested access to the Whisper Project materials as part of a broader study on electronic voice phenomena. After months of negotiations, he was granted permission to review a portion of the research notes and to listen to selected recordings made prior to the final session. His assessment, published in the Journal of Parapsychological Research in 1960, provided the first scientific analysis of Harman's work, while maintaining appropriate skepticism regarding the ultimate source of the recorded voices. I must acknowledge that the Detroit team developed recording technologies well beyond what was standard for that period. Their use of heterodyne receivers to capture extremely low-frequency electromagnetic signals was particularly innovative. The most intriguing aspect of their approach was the incorporation of what Harman called targeted frequency oscillation, essentially broadcasting specific electromagnetic patterns designed to elicit responses from whatever might be capable of detecting and interpreting them. This moves beyond passive recording into what might be termed active communication attempts. The question remains, with whom or what did they believe they were communicating? Harman's notes become increasingly unscientific on this point, referring to entities residing in adjacent frequency states and intelligences that perceive our reality from an orthogonal position. These concepts bear resemblance to theoretical physics discussions of parallel dimensions, but lack the mathematical rigor to be evaluated properly. Bennett was not granted access to the final recording or to any materials relating to the EVI Mark II. However, his analysis of the earlier work led him to a troubling conclusion. The progression of their research suggests they were moving from capturing what might be called residual electromagnetic signatures, essentially echoes of past events, toward attempting to establish real-time communication with conscious entities existing in a state outside our normal perceptual range. If we momentarily entertain their theoretical framework, this transition represents a profound shift from passive observation to active interaction with unknown intelligences. Within any responsible scientific protocol, such a leap would require extensive safety measures and ethical considerations that appear absent from their documented procedures. Put simply, they may have been attempting to open a door without knowing what waited on the other side. Bennett recommended against any attempts to replicate the Detroit team's later work, emphasizing that some technological capabilities should perhaps remain theoretical until we develop better understanding of their implications. This warning went largely unheeded. Within months of his publication, at least 3 separate research teams at various institutions began developing their own versions of Harman's early recording devices, though none attempted to recreate the EVI Mark II configuration. Then, in 1962, a startling discovery added new context to the Detroit incident. During renovation of a building adjacent to where the laboratory had stood, workers uncovered a sealed metal box in a ventilation shaft. Inside was a journal belonging to Eleanor Weiss, apparently hidden there shortly before the final experiment. The journal contained entries spanning her entire time with the Whisper Project, including observations not found in the official research notes. The most significant entry, dated October 2, 1947, the day before the fatal experiment, reveals her growing concerns. Walter has gone too far. The modifications he's made to the EVI aren't merely improvements to existing technology. They fundamentally alter the nature of what we're attempting. I've reviewed his calculations and they appear sound, but the underlying theory has shifted from communication to summoning. He speaks of thinning the veil and creating a persistent channel in ways that contradict our initial research parameters. Most disturbing was his comment yesterday that the voices we've been recording aren't those of human dead at all, but something else, using familiar patterns to establish initial contact. When I pressed him on what he meant, he smiled in that distant way he's developed and said, "The dead are merely the doormen, Eleanor. They stand at the threshold because they're familiar to us, but the intelligence behind them is something far more vast. Something that has been trying to reach us for millennia." I don't know if this delusion is the result of his war experiences or something more sinister, but I've decided to sabotage the experiment. I've modified the primary transformer to fail under the power load his new configuration will demand. It should create a visible electrical failure that will give us reason to abort before proceeding too far. I only hope it's enough to convince him to reconsider this path. Weiss's attempted sabotage evidently failed. Electrical engineers who later reviewed the equipment schematics suggested that the military surplus components Harmon added would have included backup power regulation specifically designed to prevent the kind of failure Weiss had planned. Whether she realized this too late or never had the opportunity to implement an alternative plan remains unknown. Her hidden journal provided the clearest indication that at least one senior team member recognized the dangers of their final experiment, yet was unable to prevent it. In the years following the partial declassification, the story of the Detroit Sound Phenomena Laboratory might have faded into obscurity, like so many other curious Cold War-era research projects. What kept it alive in academic circles was the persistent anomaly of the recordings themselves. The pre-incident tapes that were released to various universities for analysis contained voices that, despite extensive examination, could not be definitively explained by any known recording artifacts or environmental factors. Dr. Anita Morales, an acoustic engineer at Massachusetts Institute of Technology who analyzed the recordings in 1965, summarized the problem. These recordings have been subjected to every analytical technique available, including spectral analysis, voice-print comparison, and pattern recognition algorithms. The voices exhibit all the acoustic properties of genuine human speech, including micro-variations in pitch, natural harmonic overtones, and appropriate formant transitions. Yet they appear in recordings made under controlled conditions where no such speech should be present. More puzzling still, some contain accurate information unknown to the researchers at the time of recording, such as the full name of a patient who had died in Detroit Receiving Hospital the night before a morgue recording, which was later verified against hospital records. I remain skeptical of paranormal explanations, but I cannot offer a conventional acoustic or technical explanation that accounts for all the observed phenomena. While academic interest focused on the technical aspects of the recordings, a different kind of attention came from an unexpected quarter. Beginning in 1963, individuals connected to the incident reported strange experiences. Judith Pendleton, the secretary who had been absent on the day of the incident and who had subsequently relocated to Chicago, filed a police report claiming that her home radio had begun broadcasting what sounded like Dr. Harmon's voice, reciting sequences of numbers interspersed with phrases from their research protocols. When technicians examined the radio, they found nothing unusual. Yet the phenomena reportedly continued with other electronic devices in her home. Thomas Garrett, who had moved his family to California, reported similar experiences, claiming that late at night his television would sometimes display only static while playing what sounded like fragments of laboratory recordings he recognized from his time with the project. Most disturbing was the experience of Officer Raymond Mercer, who had been among the first responders at the laboratory. In 1966, nearly 20 years after the incident, he reported waking in the middle of the night to find his bedroom unusually cold and his electric alarm clock speaking in multiple overlapping voices, similar to what I heard on the laboratory recording equipment when we investigated the scene. These incidents were documented by Dr. Bennett as part of his ongoing research, but were never officially connected to the original case by authorities. The most significant development came in 1967, when Detroit General Hospital discovered the box of materials that would eventually be transferred to the University of Michigan. How these items escaped the federal seizure of evidence remains unclear, though hospital records suggest they may have been misplaced in general storage during the chaotic initial response to the incident. The box contained not only the journals and component parts already mentioned, but also something far more significant: a partial schematic for the EVI Mark II and a recording labeled Calibration Test, September 30, 1947, that had never been reviewed by previous investigators. When this recording was played by university researchers, it revealed something extraordinary. The tape begins with standard calibration tones and equipment checks, but at the 4-minute mark, a voice that audio comparison confirmed as Harmon says, "Preliminary test of narrow-band targeting using subject-specific frequency modulation. Target, Thomas Allen Garrett, former research assistant, current location, presumed Los Angeles, California." The recording then captures approximately 3 minutes of electronic tones, changing in pitch and pattern before Harmon speaks again. Receiving signal. Clarity is exceptional given the distance, confirming connection. What follows is what sounds like Thomas Garrett's voice, though with a slightly mechanical quality, saying, "Walter, is that you? How are you in my head? I'm trying to sleep." Harmon's reply is chilling. "Sue, excellent. Connection confirmed across approximately 2,200 miles. Subject identity verified through voice pattern and content. The targeting parameters are functioning precisely as theorized." End test. The recording confirms what had only been speculated, that in the weeks before the final experiment, Harmon had developed the capability to remotely target specific individuals with his technology, essentially establishing uninvited contact across vast distances. This capability raises disturbing questions about the true purpose of the EVI Mark II, and suggests that what happened on October 3rd may have been an attempt at far broader application of this targeting technology. When Thomas Garrett was located and interviewed about this recording in 1968, he confirmed experiencing a vivid dream or hallucination on that approximate date, in which he believed Dr. Harmon was speaking to him through his bedside radio. He had dismissed it as stress-induced, given his complicated history with the project. The revelation that it had been an actual technological intrusion left him visibly shaken, according to the interviewer's notes. "If they could reach into my mind from across the country," he stated, "what else might their final version have been capable of? And who, or what, might have been able to use that capability in reverse?" The most disturbing revelation came not from the partial schematic or the calibration tape, but from the final notebook found among the recovered materials. This journal, belonging to research assistant Claire Donovan, had apparently been kept secret from even her colleagues. Written in a progressively more paranoid and fragmented style, it documents her growing awareness that the voices they were recording were having an effect on the team beyond their conscious understanding. April 15th. I've noticed a pattern in our behavior following extended sessions with the EVI. We emerge from the laboratory with what Walter calls heightened clarity about the project's direction. Each time, we collectively make significant changes to our approach without the usual scientific debate or methodological caution. Today, I realize something troubling. These shifts always move us toward more direct, continuous contact with whatever is generating the voices. It's as though we're being guided toward a specific outcome through subtle influence rather than direct instruction. As the entries continue through the summer months, her observations become increasingly specific and alarming. June 23rd. I've begun recording my dreams. The pattern is undeniable. On nights following laboratory sessions, all team members report dreaming of what Michael calls the space between spaces, a void filled with whispers and half-seen movements. Walter claims these are normal stress dreams, but this morning I found him sketching modifications to the EVI that exactly matched changes I had seen in my dream. When I pointed this out, he seemed momentarily confused before claiming he had been planning these modifications for weeks. I checked his research notes afterward. There is no mention of these specific changes anywhere in his documentation prior to today. By September, her entries suggest she had begun covertly monitoring her colleagues' behavior. September 12th. They aren't themselves anymore. Eleanor stares at blank walls during lunch breaks, lips moving in silent conversation with no one. Robert meticulously disassembles and rebuilds equipment without documenting the changes, creating configurations that shouldn't work according to any electrical engineering principles I understand, yet somehow function perfectly for our purposes. Michael spoke to me in a language that wasn't English yesterday, seemed unaware he had done so, and became agitated when I couldn't understand. And Walter has stopped sleeping entirely as far as I can determine. I've watched the laboratory from my apartment across the street. The lights in his office remain on all night, his silhouette visible at all hours, always in the same position, facing the latest EVI prototype. I believe something is coming through. Not just voices now, but influence, direction, purpose. We are being modified just as surely as our equipment is. Her final entry, dated October 2nd, the same day as Weiss's last journal entry, reveals her desperate plan. I can't stop tomorrow's test directly. They would prevent me from interfering, perhaps violently given how protective they've become of the equipment. Instead, I've left this record and modified one critical component. The primary microphone array has been recalibrated to create a feedback loop that should disrupt any sustained connection. It won't prevent the initial contact, but it should prevent whatever is trying to come through from establishing the stable pathway Walter has been designing. I fear this may be insufficient, but it's all I can manage without detection. If anyone finds this afterward, understand that we were not conducting this research at the end. It was conducting us. The voices were never random electromagnetic phenomena or spirits of the dead. They were bait, and we have nearly finished building exactly what they asked for: a door. On January 12, 1969, a small committee of researchers at the University of Michigan made a decision that would finally close the chapter on the Detroit Sound Phenomena Laboratory. After 6 months of analyzing the recovered materials, they determined that the potential risks of continuing the investigation outweighed any scientific benefits. Dr. Marcus Phillips, who chaired the committee, issued a final report that was sent to several federal agencies and then sealed in university archives. Our examination of the Whisper Project materials has led us to conclude that the research conducted by Dr. Walter Harmon and his team between 1946 and 1947 followed a dangerous trajectory, both scientifically and ethically. The technological innovations they developed appear to have functioned as intended, capturing what they believed to be communications from discarnate intelligences. Whether these communications originated from deceased human consciousness, as initially theorized, or from something else entirely, as later materials suggest, remains impossible to determine conclusively. What is clear is that the progression of their work led to increasingly erratic behavior, compromised scientific objectivity, and ultimately to the deaths of 5 researchers under circumstances that remain inadequately explained. The recovered materials contain sufficient technical information that a motivated team could potentially reconstruct portions of their experimental apparatus. We strongly recommend against any such attempt. Instead, we propose that these materials be permanently secured against future access, with no further analysis or experimentation permitted. While this recommendation contradicts standard scientific practices of open inquiry, We believe the potential hazards associated with this particular line of research justify exceptional caution. The materials were subsequently transferred to a secure storage facility at an undisclosed location. In the decades that followed, no further official investigations were conducted. The story of the Detroit Sound Phenomena Laboratory gradually transformed from scientific mystery to urban legend, occasionally referenced in paranormal literature but largely forgotten by mainstream science. Yet one final piece of the story emerged in 1986, when demolition workers, clearing the site of the old Detroit General Hospital for redevelopment, discovered a sealed lead container hidden within a wall cavity. Inside was a single tape reel with no label, wrapped in paper on which was written, "I took this from the laboratory on October 2nd, 1947. I don't know if it's proof of something miraculous or something terrible, perhaps both. But I believe it should be preserved." J. Pendleton. The tape contained approximately 17 minutes of recording from what appears to be an unauthorized session conducted late at night. The quality is poor, with significant background noise, but the content is unmistakable. A single voice, identified through comparison as Judith Pendleton herself, asks a series of questions to what seems to be an empty room. After each question, there are responses from multiple voices speaking in near-perfect unison. Most disturbing is the final exchange. Pendleton asks, "What will happen when Dr. Harmon conducts his experiment tomorrow?" The synchronized voices respond, "The door will open. We will begin to come through. This is merely the first of many such openings. Each will be larger than the last. Each will allow more of us to exist in your reality. By the time your kind realizes what is happening, the transition will be irreversible. Some of us are there already, wearing borrowed forms, preparing the way. Listen carefully to your radios. Watch the patterns in your television static. Feel the thoughts that seem almost, but not quite, your own. We are patient. We have always been patient. But soon we will not need to be. Soon we will be everywhere." The tape then captures what sounds like Pendleton hurriedly shutting down the equipment. This unauthorized recording may explain why she was absent from the laboratory on the day of the final experiment, and why she later experienced phenomena similar to those reported by others connected to the project. It suggests that at least one person associated with the Whisper Project had advance warning of what might occur, but was either unable or unwilling to prevent it. The tape was submitted to the University of Michigan's Parapsychology Department, but was subsequently reported lost during a departmental relocation in 1991. Its current whereabouts remain unknown. In the decades since the University of Michigan committee sealed the Whisper Project materials, the story has largely faded from public awareness. Occasional references appear in specialized literature on electronic voice phenomena or in histories of early parapsychological research, but the full scope of what occurred in that Detroit laboratory remains known to very few. Those who have encountered the partial records often dismiss them as products of Cold War paranoia or misinterpreted technical anomalies. Yet certain patterns persist that suggest the incident's implications may extend beyond historical curiosity. Since 1970, at least 6 separate research teams in different countries have independently developed technologies remarkably similar to Harmon's early designs, despite having no access to his classified work. In 4 of these cases, the research was discontinued after team members reported unusual psychological effects, including shared dreams, auditory hallucinations, and what one researcher described as thoughts that feel geometrically wrong, as though entering the mind from an impossible angle. Most recently, in 2014, a digital audio project at an unnamed university reportedly captured voice-like patterns emerging from white noise generators during experiments with quantum random number generators. Each team reported initial success in capturing unexplained voices, followed by equipment modifications that deviated from their original research parameters, moving toward more powerful transmission capabilities rather than improved reception. The project was abruptly defunded after preliminary results were submitted for peer review. The lead researcher subsequently left academia entirely, refusing all interview requests from colleagues. Perhaps most concerning are the reports that continue to emerge from individuals with no connection to formal research. The advent of digital recording technology and the internet has led to thousands of amateur attempts to capture electronic voice phenomena, many using methods that unconsciously replicate aspects of Harman's approach. Online communities share techniques and recordings, gradually refining their methods through collective trial and error. Few of these enthusiasts know anything about the Detroit Sound Phenomena Laboratory or the warnings contained in the sealed records. They proceed with the same blend of scientific curiosity and metaphysical exploration that characterized Harman's early work, unaware of where such inquiry ultimately led him and his team. For those few who know the full story, these modern experiments raised troubling questions. Was the incident in 1947 truly an isolated event, conclusively ended when the laboratory was demolished? Or was it merely the first documented case of something that continues to occur whenever the right technological conditions are created? Are the boundaries between different states of existence or different realities truly as fixed and impermeable as we prefer to believe? And if not, what might be waiting for another opportunity to cross over? The final entry in Dr. Marcus Phillips' personal notes, written the day after he recommended sealing the Whisper Project materials, suggests these questions haunted at least one of the investigators. I find myself unable to dismiss Harman's work as mere delusion or misinterpreted phenomena. The evidence taken in its totality points to something our current scientific framework is inadequate to explain. What disturbs me most is not the possibility that he established communication with something beyond conventional understanding, but rather how that communication appears to have influenced the communicators themselves. If Donovan's observations are accurate, the team was subtly directed toward creating exactly what the entities required. This suggests not random contact but purposeful manipulation toward a specific goal. The question that keeps me awake at night is whether that goal was achieved on October 3rd, 1947, or merely advanced to the next stage of some longer process. I find myself paying unusual attention to electronic devices in my home, particularly late at night. The patterns in television static, the momentary drops in radio signals, the strange echoes sometimes heard on telephone lines. Are these truly random electrical phenomena? Or are they attempts at continuation of what began in that Detroit laboratory? I have recommended the materials be sealed, not because I believe they represent a scientific dead end, but because I fear they represent something with no end at all, a door that once recognized can never be entirely closed again.